Hare Krishna. So we are continuing to read the 25th chapter of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The chapter is titled The Characteristics of King Puranjana. Text 45. Is that correct? 45, right? Yesterday, Swarupa Damodar Prabhu read 44. It was a very elucidating class that Swarupa Damodar Prabhu gave yesterday. He went through Srila Prabhupada's description of different stages of consciousness in his lecture. And he concluded with a wonderful verse from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Who remembers which verse Swarupa Damodar Prabhu quoted yesterday? I mean, not the Sanskrit, but the translation. Who remembers? It was a very inspiring verse. Was it? It was very inspiring, but we don't remember how. It was so inspiring, we don't remember what kind of... Yeah, the verse was from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which spoke about the merciful nature of great devotees of the Lord who is compared to the sun, and the great devotees of the Lord, they assume the process of devotional service by which the ocean of material existence, even though it's very fearsome and difficult to overcome, becomes easily overcome by them, and then they leave on this shore the boat of the lotus feet of the Lord in the form of devotional service, which allows us to follow their example or their footsteps and attain the same result. And Srila Prabhupada explains, the Swarupa Damodar Prabhu quoted from the purport by Srila Prabhupada, in which he explains that it's not actually what we do in devotional service, it's who we receive the methods of devotional service from. Because the great devotees of the Lord, just like Srila Prabhupada or any great acharyas in his lineage, they have the ability or the jurisdiction, you could say, to assign certain processes of devotional service which, because of their connection with Krishna, all-merciful Krishna, become fully potent. And Prabhupada gives an example in his purport that previously it used to be much more difficult, you could say, to follow the process of devotional service. While it was proportionate to the level of devotees practicing it. Srila Rupa Goswami in one of his prayers says, Prachinanam bhajanam atulam dushkaram shinvatomi. He says, Rupa Goswami says, when I remember the difficult process of devotional service followed by the previous acharyas, I become disappointed, I become desperate. That's the word he uses. Rupa Goswami says, I'm lazy and I don't have even the fraction of their determination to follow devotional service. And the standard of devotional service they followed is completely unattainable for me. So prachinanam means of the previous prachinanam, of the previous acharyas. Bhajanam atulam, the bhajan atulam, unparalleled, dushkaram, which is very difficult to follow. Srinvatomi, when I hear about it, I become morose, because I cannot follow that process of devotional service that they followed. And Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport that when we hear about the processes or the standards of devotional service followed by the previous acharyas like Haridas Thakur, he used to chant how many rounds? Go figure. How many? He counted, but he didn't count for the sake of, like sometimes I don't want to speak about you, but on my behalf I can say like 16, okay, 16. Done it. Right? Sometimes it becomes, even though Srila Prabhupada emphasizes oftentimes in his initiation ceremonies, you can hear him accept the vows, and he emphasizes 16 is a minimum. Like a few days ago, at the Ratha Yatra, Ram Govinda Maharaj and Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj gave initiations, and one devotee was taking his vows, and I don't remember which Maharaj of the two was it, when he emphasized it's a minimum. Don't take the vow of chanting 16 rounds, minimum 16 rounds. So it doesn't happen, so if you chant 17 rounds, it becomes a violation of your vows at initiation. No, don't take minimum 16 rounds. So Prabhupada emphasized minimum. But Srila Haridas Thakur, he chanted on all levels of his consciousness. Sarupa Damodar Prabhu yesterday spoke about different levels of consciousness, and he also spoke about how pure devotees, he gave the example of, who did he give the example of? Who remembers? So, wonderful class. It was very lucid, very clear and well structured, and very emphasized very important points. And he spoke about great devotees who don't have enough time in their jagrata, in their wakeful state, to do devotional service, and their devotional service spills over into their other levels of consciousness, be it swapna or even sushupti, what to speak of turiya, the fourth level of devotional service, which pure devotees always reside in. So Srila Haridas Thakur chanted, they say, 300,000 or 3 lakhs of the holy name. Oh, Sarupa Damodar Prabhu just spoke about you and your class. I took the liberty of quoting you while you were not present. So Sarupa Damodar Prabhu, unfortunately I wasn't present physically, but I listened to it very attentively. And I actually just asked devotees about what they remembered from the class, and especially the way they concluded it with that very inspiring quote from Srila Prabhupada from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in which Prabhupada emphasizes how it's the Acharya who makes the devotional service we follow effective. It's not the numerical strength or a particular form of devotional service self-assigned. Prabhupada in the Nectar of Devotion says devotees shouldn't assign to themselves different processes of devotional service. Svesvedikari yanishta, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna says that the only, what's the word he used, merit in devotional service is to measure it properly according to one's qualification. But even that measurement is not done by devotee himself or herself. It's the Acharya who calibrates the devotional service according to the adhikara. And if someone tries to exceed his or her adhikara, thinking that if particular level of devotional service is actually much more profitable or much more glorious or much more efficient, then he or she may run the risk of falling flat on their face in the process of devotional. Of course, Yanastkhaya naro rajanna pramadeta karhichit davan nimilya vanetre natskhalena patyatiha. Even if one out of his immaturity runs down the path of devotional service and falls, well, the verse says one never falls, and one never trips and never falls on the path of devotional service, even if he or she run down that path with both eyes closed. Yanastkhaya naro rajan namamadhyata karhichi davan nimilya vanetre means the acharyas explain that the two closed eyes are compared to the ignorance of shrutis and smritis. Even if he doesn't know much of the shastric knowledge, but if he follows blindly, it's a very scary word, and as blindly following. It used to be a very glorious thing in ISKCON. Blindly following Srila Prabhupada, and no one had any trepidation about it, but nowadays in different quarters it becomes almost like a curse word. But yeah, the verse says even if you run down that path of Bhagavat Dharma, which means following the Bhagavatas, the great devotees of the Lord, you may be confident that you will not trip or fall on that path of devotional service. It's ironically, it's when we try to open our eyes and look sideways, saying, "Do they do the right thing? Do they actually tell me the right thing? Did they give it to me properly? Do they actually know what they're talking about themselves?" Prabhupada was an interesting incident when Prabhupada was given initiation to Haridas Prabhu, who recently passed away a couple of years ago. That famous devotee who used to be a thief, and he came to steal Prabhupada's gold watch. And then Prabhupada initiated him on the spot. And then one of Prabhupada's disciples, his secretary, told Prabhupada, in his, I guess, he wanted to help Prabhupada, but it wasn't very helpful. He said, Prabhupada, you don't know what you're doing. Initiating that person. And Prabhupada stopped in his tracks and very sternly told him, never ever tell me that I don't know what I'm doing, ever. It means you don't know what you're doing, telling me that you don't know what I am doing, right? So Prabhupada, he knew perfectly well. So when Prabhupada in that purport that Sarupa Damodar Prabhu quoted yesterday, he says, used to be prachinanam bhajanam atulam dushkaram shivatomi, very difficult to perform the kind of devotional service that acharyas of the past performed. And Rupa Goswami says, I don't have that qualification. I'm lazy and unfortunate. I don't have the kind of, even the modicum of shraddha that the devotees of the past had in devotional service. That's why I cannot even think about doing what they used to do. So the same way Srila Prabhupada, even though devotional service for such great devotees is as natural as breathing for us, they do that, as Sarupa Damodar Prabhu explained, on all levels of their existence. I heard of one Prabhupada's disciple who was going to undergo a heart surgery, triple bypass or something, under general anesthesia, and before he was given anesthesia, he started meditating on the beautiful forms of the particular deity of Shri Radha Krishna. I know the person's name, but it's protected by medical confidentiality. He started meditating on the forms of the Lord who he served in the temple, and so he visualized them very, very clearly. And then he was given anesthesia, and a few hours later he emerged from that sushupti state. And guess what? The image of the Lord was still in front of his eyes. So in other words, throughout that sushupti, that completely imperceptible state of consciousness, they stayed with him. Like that. So Srila Prabhupada explains in that purport that even though the principles of devotional service followed by, say, Haridas Thakur are completely unparalleled, he even went on record as saying that if we try, well, he said, if you try to his disciples to follow what Haridas Thakur practiced, he said, you'll go crazy. That was his exact words. You'll become deranged mentally because the body and the mind won't be able to withstand or hold up to that level of intensity. But he said, if you follow the proper or authorized principles of devotional service prescribed by great devotees, then you'll get the same result easily. Even though, again, Sarupa Damodar Prabhu made the reference to in his class yesterday to that principle. Sometimes what great devotees promise to their followers seems to be a way of tricking them into following. It is too simple. Interestingly, it becomes particularly too simple sometimes and difficult to follow by those with an upbringing in traditional Vaishnava lineage. When they join ИСККОН, then they kind of start comparing what they used to hear from their acharyas and then from what they hear from Srila Prabhupada, and it starts appearing to them as if Prabhupada was trying to somehow or other trick his disciples by giving them deliberately something very simple or simplified, basic, which is not going to bring about the desired result. But then Srila Prabhupada in his lecture, a series of lectures on Prahlada Maharaj's prayers in Mayapur, there's a wonderful quote. Prabhupada quotes the verse by Prahlada Maharaj, who says, I would like to, my aspiration is to follow your Britya Seva, your the service of your servant. And I don't want to have even your own personal association, my Lord. Don't even offer it to me. I won't go for it. I won't fall for it. And then Prabhupada says that if a devotee of Krishna promises something, and then he says, even if it's not proper, if it's wrong, but a devotee of Krishna promises, then Krishna fulfills it. Because he thinks, well, my devotee has promised, it must be fulfilled. Somehow or other I have to figure out how to make it come true. And then Prabhupada says something completely outrageous. He says, and therefore if a pure devotee of Krishna tells you, I'll take you to Krishna Loka, you must go there. You must go there, he says. And then he says, even Krishna cannot do that. In other words, Krishna cannot promise, I'll take you to Krishna Loka. And then Prabhupada says, well, he can, but I mean to say he doesn't do it. But if a devotee of the Lord says, I take you to Krishna Loka, then you must go there. Whether you want to go there or not, you could say, you must. Because that's his desire. And somehow Krishna will arrange things in such a way that such a devotee will end up in a situation which may apparently look like a very unfavorable situation. Sometimes devotees die in very, you could say, inauspicious circumstances, be it of a disease or a car accident or fire or something like that. But what the general public or superficial devotees, sometimes there is such a expression used, devotees who do not go, not saragrahi, they don't understand the essence of what's going on. They may just write it off as a sure proof, evidence that this particular devotee hasn't made it. Because everything happened in his or her life just like in anyone else's ordinary person's life. Srila Prabhupada in his letter to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, what year was that? 2002 that Tamal Krishna Maharaj passed away in Mayapur. I was there when the announcement was made at Mangalarati that Tamal Krishna Maharaj on his way to Calcutta passed away in a car accident. And then I was very intrigued by, on the one hand, the closeness, proximity of Tamal Krishna Maharaj to Srila Prabhupada. He was Prabhupada's right-hand man, as you could say. And Prabhupada entrusted him with so many different, very difficult to perform tasks. And I could see, just days leading up to that departure, when Tamal Krishna Maharaj had come to Mayapur for the first time in how many years? It was like quite a few, 6 or 7 years that he hasn't attended the GBC meetings, then he came. And it was something very special about him, is that I will get to the verse, I'm sorry, it was still a recap on Sarupa Damodar Prabhu's class. I was so inspired by how he brought out these important topics in his class. We haven't even started the verse yet. If you want to continue, Prabhuji, anyhow, it was something special about Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He was, you could see he was glowing. He was very effulgent. And that effulgence that he had was a sort of the quiet happiness, bliss that he had around him. Because usually Tamal Krishna Maharaj was very intense, I saw some of his disciples, very big and powerful and very strong-minded people. Jai Shishi Radha Radhanath Ki Jai. Hiding underneath chairs when Tamal Krishna Maharaj would walk into the room. But at that time he was very blissful. He would swim in the Ganges. I remember he was swimming in the Ganges by himself and was blissful. And he would have kirtans in his room across the courtyard from where I stayed in Lotus Building. And he would invite different kirtaniyas like Govinda Maharaj, Niranjana Swami, Indradyumna Maharaj, and they would have kirtans across the road, across the courtyard from where I stayed. And I would just from the balcony, I would try to see what was going on. And I was told that he wasn't even leading the kirtan, he was just sitting there and taking the holy name, just rocking back and forth, and he wouldn't lead the kirtan himself. He was just blissfully participating as anyone else in the audience, like that. And then he passed away, and I was very curious to see if there are any indications of Prabhupada's instructions to Tamal Krishna Maharaj as to his departure. And you know what? I found a letter written to Tamal Krishna that time, that Tamal Krishna Das in 1968, I think, or 68. And he wrote in that letter to Tamal Krishna, who was already a very powerful and dynamic preacher. He said, "I'm so happy that you serve the Lord in such a, serve Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in such a dynamic and active way." And he said, "I wish that you live for 100 years. Srila Prabhupada writes, which doesn't tally with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, 55 years when he passed away, almost like half the age that Srila Prabhupada blessed him to live for. And he said, "Well, I wish you to live for 100 years serving the Lord in this way." And then he says, "But as soon as the Lord recognizes someone for his service, he immediately calls him to his side. Okay, come back here." As soon as he recognizes someone, he calls him to his side. That's the sign of recognition by the Lord. And then the Lord arranges things in such a way, and he doesn't care much as to what people will think about the arrangement. Like, look at Chitraketu Maharaj. If you didn't know that he was a great devotee of the Lord, the way he passed away was a very painful, very protracted, messy, bloody affair. The way it's described, right? He was being literally chopped up alive by Indra, Chitraketu, in his form as Vritrasura. Right? Doesn't look like Krishna's mercy, to me at least, right? But it was Krishna's arrangement to speed things up for him and take him back to the spiritual world. Prabhupada explains in the purport. So Krishna somehow interferes into the life of his devotee and takes him back, or her. And he makes arrangements in such a way that people who think the devotees are regular people, they will have every excuse to think this way. And they'll have evidence. Look, that's how he passed away. There's nothing special. So Srila Prabhupada gave us this process of devotional service, 16 rounds minimum, following the four regulative principles and reading his books. That's another often underestimated and not appreciated enough, should I say, even though it sounds very strange in ИСККОН setting to say that Prabhupada's books are not appreciated enough. But with the multitude of different other books coming, translations and commentaries and different other books, sometimes Prabhupada's books become obscured in a way that Prabhupada himself would have probably been very displeased with, because he said that these are not ordinary books, these are the books that Srila Prabhupada very carefully transplanted Krishna and the qualification to see Krishna in every page. That's how he described his Bhagavatam in the first canto, third chapter, even before he went to the West. I think that at that time the Bhagavatam was still as a manuscript and hasn't been published yet. But Prabhupada says, if you carefully read the Bhagavatam, then you see Krishna face to face in every page. So that's the blessing. And we can see the devotees who read Prabhupada's books carefully and discuss them, they have no doubt that Krishna exists, and they also have no doubt that they exist for Krishna, that Krishna is there for them to meet and take them back to the spiritual world. Somehow it becomes reality, just like the eyes. Now we have to read the verse. I know it's already 5 minutes past 8. We'll read the verse now. But the verse speaks about different gates of the city of Puranjana. And the eyes, they have to function by having a proper physiological structure maintained, and also by proper nourishment. There are certain nutrients that maintain the vision of the eyes. And if a person doesn't get enough of such nutrients, no matter what he or she does, the eyes will lose their eyesight. It's only because of that particular nutrient that the eyes develop the ability to see. And there is nothing to replace it. In the same way, Srila Prabhupada's books and his lectures, there's a very nice description in Upanishads. They describe Krishna as there's a sequence of descriptions. They say that Krishna is the eyes of the eyes, he is the ears of the ears, he is the mind of the mind, he is the nostrils of the nostrils, he is the hands of the hands. That sounds paradoxical, but it emphasizes that Krishna is the one who gives ability for the eyes to see. He is the eyes of the eyes. And for us, of course, Krishna is present in Prabhupada's books, and that's where we find the spiritual eyes to see Krishna as not just a marble statue or a beautiful symbol of the Lord, but as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Absolute Truth, not just the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the Supreme Absolute Truth, which means that He has a relationship, has a connection with every single sphere of our life, be it in Jagrata, wakeful state, or in sleeping state, or in Sushupti, darkened state of consciousness, or Jagrata, the fourth Turiya, the level of consciousness, which is accessible for great devotees like Srila Prabhupada, and they can also make it accessible to us. So with this short preface, which again was prompted by a class by Sarupa Damodar Prabhu yesterday, we'll read the verse, today's verse, and we haven't chanted Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya yet, have you? No. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat Nashta Prayesha Bhadrashu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatsu Tamashlokya Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So verse number 45, chapter 25, the characteristics of skin Puranjana. Sapta Parikrita Dvara Sapto Parikrita Dvara Purastasyastu Dve Adha Purastasyastu Dve Adha Prithak Vishaya Gach Artham Prithak Vishaya Gach Artham Tasyam ya kanchana neshvaraha Tasyam ya kaschaneshvaraha Sapto parikrita dvara Purastasyastu dve adha Pridhag vishaya gachartham Tasyam ya kaschaneshvaraha. Saptopari. Actually, sorry, this word is broken up. Sapta, 7. Upari, up. Kritaha, made. Dvaraha, gates. Puraha, of the city. Tasyaha, that. Tu, then. Dve, two. Adaha, down. Prithak, different. Vishaya, two places. Gachartam, for going. Tasyam, in that city. Yaha, one who. Kaschana, whoever. Ishvaraha, governor. Translation, purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation, of the 9 gates in that city, 7 were on the surface and 2 were subterranean. A total of 9 doors were constructed, and these led to different places. all the gates were used by the city's governor. Purport. The 7 gates of the body that are situated upwards are the 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. The 2 subterranean gates are the rectum and the genitals. The king or the ruler of the body, who is the living entity, uses all these doors to enjoy different types of material pleasures. The system of opening different gates in different places is still evident in old Indian cities. Formerly, a capital was surrounded by walls, and one passed through various gates to go to various cities or toward specific directions. In old Delhi, there are still remnants of surrounding walls and various gates, known as the Kashmiri Gate, the Lahori Gate, etc. Similarly, in Ahmedabad, there is a Delhi Gate. The point of this simile is that the living entity wants to enjoy different types of material opulences, and to this end nature has given him various holes in his body that he can utilize for sense enjoyment. Saptopari krita dvaras purastasya studve adhah pridhak vishaya gatyartham tasyam yah kashchaneshwaraha. Of the 9 gates of the city, 7 were on the surface and 2 were subterranean. A total of 9 doors was constructed, and these led to different places. All the gates were used by the city's governor. Om Agyanti Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutaleshvayam Rupakadamahyam Nedati Svalpadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yudapana Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Shagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sanjivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lita Shri Vishakam Vitamshya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshvari Vrisha Bhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpataru Bhishcha Kripa Sindhu Bhyavacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasani Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyate Desha Tarine. Well, you can say it's a recurrent theme in Srimad Bhagavatam, this example, not just in the Bhagavatam, but also Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita uses the same example. He speaks about the body as a city of different gates, and these gates are, in a technical parlance, you could say they're just like input-output ports or devices that connect the inner workings of the living entity with the outside world. And one of the reasons why the Bhagavatam uses this as a recurrent theme, whoever speaks it in the first canto of Bhagavatam all the way up to the 11th canto, 12th canto of Bhagavatam, there are certain examples along the same lines that deconstruct the material body in very stark and sobering terms. Sometimes this deconstruction is quite anatomical, like in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam of all cantos, and the person speaking was Rukmini Devi of all characters of the Srimad Bhagavatam, addressing Lord Krishna, and she very graphically deconstructed, almost like a philosophical autopsy on the body. She said, well, what is this body of a man who... And then she starts describing it in very unflattering terms, the body of a man, which is... should I even... It's spoken by Rukmini. Last time when we happened to be giving class, we also made a reference to Rukmini Devi, who with her very sharp and incisive words cut down the pride of Shishupala by correcting a few mistakes in his own letter to her. And in this particular instance, Rukmini Devi, again, she doesn't mince words. She says, well, the body is just like a leather bag filled up with unclean substances, mucus and air and blood, and decorated with bunches of hair here and there, and inhabited by different insects and parasites. That's how she deconstructs the body of an ordinary human being in her discussion with Krishna. It's important. The Bhagavatam speaks in two, you could say, Bhagavatam speaks in many languages. There is a reference to the Bhagavatam description in Tattva Sandarbha. Srila Jiva Goswami quotes Vopadev, a famous scholar of the past, who says that the Vedas speak like a very stern, strict father in imperatives. Usually the fathers say, do this, don't do that, and it's just like that. Verbs are used in imperative tense as an injunction which cannot be disobeyed. Then the Puranas, Vopadev is being quoted by Jiva Goswami, the Puranas speak like friends. A friend walks over to a friend and puts his hand around his shoulder and says, okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? In a very friendly way to encourage his friend in a particular direction. And then the Kavya is another corpus of scriptures, speaks to us like a lover, and the lovers sometimes whisper pleasantries into the ears of the beloved, the words that no one else can understand except the person who the words are meant for. Sometimes the lover even doesn't say anything at all. He or she just remains silent, and that silence communicates more than words. But then Vopadev continues to explain that the Bhagavatam speaks in all three languages at the same time, as an instruction, as an injunction, very strictly, also as a friend, and also as a beloved, encouraging by different innuendos and different roundabout ways, encouraging the proper spiritual emotions in the heart of the listener. So this is what is also manifested by one of the main speakers of the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni. I don't know how many verses Narada Muni speaks, but he's up there, one of the most prolific speakers and characters of Srimad Bhagavatam. And his particular feature of Narada Muni is that he loves to preach to people who seem to be completely useless for all intents and purposes, either because they're completely materialistic, and Narada Muni even attempts to preach to somebody like Hiranyakashipu in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, or to someone who is completely swayed and carried away by what they think to be the highest goal of Vedic pursuits, like King Prachina Barhishat. Interestingly, just the previous chapter, the previous chapter is a stark contrast with the chapter that we read now, 25th chapter. 24th chapter was very closely related to this chapter, because this chapter is spoken to King Prachina Barhishat, but the previous chapter, who remembers who the chapter was spoken to? To borrow a tool from Swarupa Damodar Prabhu's toolbox, and he asks questions of the audience to keep them engaged, right? Who remembers? What was the 24th chapter about? Just the chapter before was a song sung by Lord Shiva. I know it was what, 1.5 months ago, because we're already 45th verse, right? Almost 2 months ago. So 2 months is a long time. But it was spoken by Lord Shiva to Prachetas, the sons of Prachina Barhishat. And that chapter, the 21st chapter of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, is completely, you could say, different from its approach and its content, because Lord Shiva speaks about the most exalted topics. Actually, exactly 1 chapter ago, verse 45 of the 24th chapter is where Lord Shiva describes, here we hear the description, now it's gone. We see the description of the 8 of the 9 holes in the body. I remember just earlier this year, what was it? Vaisheshika Prabhu. In Mayapur, he gave class, and the class was about holes in the body. And it was so, actually I wanted to re-listen to that lecture again, but didn't have time. But he just spoke that holy class on holes in the body, emphasizing how imperfect, how deficient our existence is in the material world. Literally, the only thing we can enjoy in this world is holes, black holes mostly, of the body. And he went on to very nice, very positive, you could say. His class ended up in a very positive note, on a very positive note. And one chapter before, Lord Shiva was describing the beautiful transcendental body of Krishna. Exactly one chapter apart from today's description. And I want to read that translation of the verses he speaks. The Lord's beauty resembles a dark cloud during the rainy season. As the rainfall glistens, his bodily features also glisten. Indeed, he is the sum total of all beauty. The Lord has 4 arms and an exquisitely beautiful face with eyes like lotus petals, a beautiful, highly raised nose, a mind-attracting smile, a beautiful forehead, and equally beautiful and fully decorated ears. So when we leave Krishna, this is the standard of beauty that we are used to, we're addicted to in the spiritual world. When we leave that standard of beauty and that standard of corresponding happiness, then we start looking through different holes of the body for that kind of beauty, and we don't find it. And the material body is constructed in such a way that the ultimate result of its possession or its use, it's us being the inhabitant of the body, is disappointment, complete disappointment. That's the way the material world is constructed. And the treacherous nature of this world is that we cannot really pinpoint the exact source of disappointment. It wouldn't have been much easier for us to try and be happy if we had those strict causal relationships. Okay, I'm disappointed, I know exactly why I'm disappointed. But even such great souls as Vyasadeva, when he thought about the cause of his disappointment and his frustration and dissatisfaction, he couldn't come to a conclusion. Why? Because the source or the cause of that disappointment is not of this world. That's how Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas like Jiva Goswami also, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they came up with the term time immemorial, which means the exact source of our misery in this world, which takes on different shapes. The misery in the material mode of passion, ignorance is abject. It cannot be dissipated. It's so dark that people get used to living in it and they don't really mind. There is no hope for them to actually try and surpass that misery just because they don't see any light in that state of complete darkness. But then the mode of passion is even more, you could say, bewildering and treacherous, because it gives a semblance of knowledge. It misleads a person into thinking that, oh yeah, that's where I get the relief of my miseries from. And it continues to incite the plan-making activity of such a person, the mode of passion, by completely or continuously moving that, the landmarks of his pursuits. Just like a mirage. Prabhupada used to give that example of a mirage which advances away from you as you move closer to it. As a result, the only result of such pursuits is exhaustion. But then the mode of goodness, you could hope that maybe that will give me happiness or some hope. No, because as soon as a person develops the mode of goodness, he or she understands there is no happiness in this world. He's wise enough not to look for it. But if he doesn't know where it is, then his position becomes even more miserable. And in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, again, one of those deconstructions of the material body is taken into different elements again, and each element is analyzed in terms of what misery, that exquisite, the particular specialty, misery, that particular part of the body brings about. Be it the senses bring about, from what I remember, unquenchable thirst and hunger and sexual drive. Then the mind, which plagues us with memories of the past and the sense of inferiority, and I may mix things up. I don't remember exactly how it was explained, but you can get the idea, right? And then they all combine together, team up, gang up on the inhabitant of the body, and they cause an unlimited range of miseries. Like that. That's why the material nature, who is Krishna's very faithful and loyal servant, she is not going to give us happiness. It's not within her jurisdiction to give us happiness. She can give us anything else. You pick. Whatever you want, she can give. Except, asterisk and fine print, except happiness. Because happiness is not her jurisdiction, that's Krishna's. So when the pure devotees like Narada Muni speak about the body, even though their words might appear to be irrelevant for higher spiritual pursuits, they do actually have a very important role to play in our spiritual development, because they disillusion us. They disillusion us and they cut out all our other hopes for us being happy in this material world. That's how the Bhagavatam constructs or deconstructs this world and the body. Just like sometimes, it's a good example, like times movies, and nowadays movies are made with a lot of computer-generated imagery, which makes scenes and situations completely lifelike. But sometimes what they do is that they add a few minutes after the movie, showing how the movie was made. And you see there are no dragons, no wizards, no magic tricks, no flying through the air. Everything was made in a pavilion on the green screen, and then all those strings and cardboard figures were edited out and replaced with what? Anyway, it's so upsetting. After all that thrill that the person came and paid a lot of money to watch, then they show you what it actually was. No heroes, no superpowers, no nothing. Just regular folks. Alright? So the same way the Bhagavatam disillusions us, shows us, Atyantavanta kauntayana teshara mate buddhaha. This is what the world is. Now, do you want to enjoy it? No. Come on, try to enjoy it. No. What else is there? And then what else is there is spoken by, again, Narada Muni and Lord Shiva and other great devotees. To the disillusioned living entity, they are willing and ready to give them the actual purpose of life. Krishna's wonderful appearance, Krishna's wonderful pastimes, his wonderful devotees, and also these great narrators of Srimad Bhagavatam give us the eyes, these proper spiritual eyes, which will enable us to be able to see the beauty of Krishna and beauty of the spiritual world as real, as much real as nowadays we see the material world around us. I think my time is up. I was going to say something completely different to what, but it was all because of Swarupa Damodar Prabhu's yesterday's class. So I wanted to continue in the same vein. Somehow felt inspired to try and recap on what he spoke and continue in the same direction. Do you have any comments or questions or corrections? It's already 8:30. It's time for us to associate with Krishna in his most accessible form. Right? Yeah.
Hare Krishna. About the body and the different parts of the body being vehicles for suffering, His Holiness Bhakti Charaswami would often use the example to drive home the point that the material body is designed for suffering, and he would give proof that he takes some arbitrary part of the body like the thumb, and he'll ask the audience, can you think of the number of ways that you can give pleasure to this thumb? You could put some lotion in it, you could massage it, blow on it or something. Then think of the number of ways you could inflict pain on the thumb. And the number of ways to inflict pain on the thumb is so many more than giving pleasure. And he made the point, and you extrapolate that principle throughout the body, that it's really designed for pain and not for pleasure. But then even though we get daily, I mean, at least nowadays as I'm getting older, we get a daily reminder about the body being a receptacle of pain. How is it that every morning we get up with renewed optimism that, oh, I'm going to be happy again in this body? Why is it that we somehow like do a reset? We forget everything, even though it's just a constant reminder in front of us.
That's the question, huh? Well, on the first part of your remark, I guess that example by Bhaktichara Maharaj was given before the advent of smartphones, because nowadays thumbs are actually the only source of pleasure for people these days. I think that's the only source. Everything else depends on how you use your thumb, right? On a smartphone. So I think he might have come up with a different example. Maybe he would use an index finger or something, or a pinky, because thumb is all in all nowadays for people. Just like it used to be, who was that, Ekalavya, who cut off the thumb on Dronacharya's request, and that was basically the end of his career as an archer. So nowadays I think people value their thumbs as much, if not more, to be able to operate their smartphones. And I don't know how they do it. I watched young people do their smartphone modules, and the speed of tapping and typing, it's something on par with Ekalavya's proficiency in archery, I think. So, as far as the second part, with renewed optimism, I don't know. Actually, I think, now that you mention it, I think there is a tipping point before it's climbing up and reaches its peak optimism, but then every time you wake up you realize that it's going to be the same as yesterday, and as much futility of hopes for optimism that I encountered it last year, the day before. I don't think it's going to be any different. So maybe that tipping point happens around mid-age, kind of, when we'll know better than expecting anything good from this day, until and unless we manage to come to Mangalarati and see the beautiful forms of Shri Shri Radha Radhanath. I remember Mataji Devi Shakti of Vrindavan. Who knows? Who of you know Devi Shakti? She's an amazing person. Huh? She's glowing like the sun. You could see, and she's what? She's probably the senior most Vaishnavi in Vrindavan, ИСККОН Vrindavan. I think she started residing in Vrindavan before the temple was even built. And she once was given a class, and somebody started asking her questions about Raga Nuga Bhakti and things like that. Well, it's recorded. I think it can be found. Her answer was nothing less of Rukmini's answer to and she says, our Raga Nuga Bhakti is, we should come to Mangalarati, and we should come unless we are half dead. That was her. So that's the optimism. And Prabhupada explains in that optimism, proper mixture or ratio, balance between optimism, pessimism, and the life of a devotee. In his famous letter to Atreya Rishi about utopia, and towards the end he says, a devotee is always pessimistic about the material world, but he or she is always optimistic about the spiritual world. So when a devotee wakes up in the morning, then of course, maybe sometimes because of the health condition, that pessimism kicks in, and reminds the devotee, well, the body of the city of 9 gates is not going to live too long. The gates are shutting down. Sometimes it takes an effort to open up gates. As Badrinarayan Maharaj once said in his class, you're lucky you have some of the gates at least functioning, because as the time goes by, those gates, they tend to collapse and malfunction. You cannot really use them so much as intended, right? But then the optimism comes with the remembrance, well, I'm still alive in this body, and Krishna still allows me to remember him, still allows me to get myself up and force myself into Mangalarati. And then once we force ourselves successfully into Mangalarati, then something else happens. Then there is another energy takes over. Now we're not at the mercy of the material energy, we're at the mercy of the spiritual energy. Which makes, interestingly, now I was thinking how to conclude that discussion today on holes in the body. But now with your lead, your question, I know how to conclude it. There is a verse in the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by Shukracharya. And Shukracharya, was it Shukracharya? No, I think it's one of the major. Anyway, he was there in 8th canto of Bhagavatam. And it says, Mantratah tantratah chidram I forgot the second line. Sarvam karoti nishchidram anusankirtan mantava. At least I got 3 out of 4. The second line says, Arha vastutaha. It says, even if there are deficiencies, literally holes, chidra means holes, in the mantras and the tantras, the rituals you perform, in the performer and the place, time, circumstances, ingredients. Sarvam karoti nishchidram anusankirtanam tava. My Lord, they address the Lord, the sankirtan of your holy names makes everything nishchidra, means it fills up all the holes, all deficiencies in our body, in our mind, in our spiritual activities. Whatever was deficient becomes perfect. Nishchidram, anusankirtanam tava, by the chanting of the holy names of yours. Everything becomes perfect. So when we come to Mangalarati or to Kirtan or to Krishna Katha, then somehow whatever deficiency we had and misgivings about this world become remedied by Krishna in his form of the holy name and in his form as his devotees. And then we walk back with substantial or substantiated expectations of optimism. Now it's substantiated. Now we have a reason to be optimistic. Before there was no reason. Right? So maybe I'll just end on this note, this positive note. Is it okay? Do you have any other comments? No? Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaura Premanande.